Law. Vikings had a complex legal system. The word law itself is a Viking word. When a Viking was charged with a crime, he went to the ting, a court, where a jury of 12, 24, or 36, depending on the crime's gravity, either convicted or declared him innocent. A common way to solve disputes between two parties was with a duel. The first Viking's blood to touch the ground lost the case. The idea was that the gods were on the victor's side and they wouldn't let the innocent lose. This practice continued until Christianity was introduced in Scandinavia. Clothing. Like in most of Europe, wool was widely used to make clothes. Wherever the Vikings settled, they brought sheep with them for this purpose. The clothes were made by women who also dyed them with minerals or vegetables for different colors. The men put on a long woolen shirt and long trousers, which were held up by a drawstring. They could also put a long coat on top if the weather required it. Finally, they would wear socks and either soft leather shoes or long leather boots. Additional clothing was available for the harsher winters. During battle, the Vikings used a shield, a helmet, and chainmail to protect themselves. Religion. At the beginning of the Viking Age, most Vikings were pagans and seriously disliked any other religion, including Christianity. It took the Vikings until the 12th century to finally adopt Christianity, well after the Viking Age. In general, the society of the Vikings was based on their religion. They believed in several gods, and each provided them with benefits or punishments based on their actions. Vikings believed that their day of death was already established by the gods, and anything they did could not change this day. Feudalism, the dominant social system in medieval Europe in which the nobility held lands from the crown in exchange for military service, and vassals were in turn tenants of the nobles, while the peasants, villeins, or serfs were obliged to live on their lord's land and give him homage, labor, and a share of the produce in exchange for military protection. The king was in complete control under the feudal system. He owned all the land in the country and decided who he would lease land to. He therefore only allowed those men he could trust to lease land from him. However, before they were given any land, they had to swear an oath to remain faithful to the king at all times. The men who leased land from the king were known as barons. They were wealthy, powerful, and had complete control of the land they leased from the king. Barons leased land from the king, which was known as a manor. They were known as the lord of the manor and were in complete control of this land. They established their own system of justice, minted their own money, and set their own taxes. In return for the land they had been given by the king, the barons had to serve on the royal council, pay rent, and provide the king with knights for military service when he demanded it. They also had to provide lodging and food for the king and his court when they traveled around the country. The barons kept as much of their land as they wished for their own use, then divided the rest among their knights. Barons were very rich. Knights were given land by a baron in return for military service when demanded by the king. They also had to protect the baron and his family, as well as the manor, from attack. The knights kept as much of the land as they wished for their own personal use and distributed the rest to villeins. Although not as rich as the barons, knights were quite wealthy. Villeins, sometimes known as serfs, were given land by knights. They had to provide the knight with free labor, food, and service whenever it was demanded. Villeins had no rights. They were not allowed to leave the manor and had to ask their lord's permission before they could marry. Villeins were very poor.
Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel of Castile in 1469 established a state church. They had little concern for the Jewish people. Isabel was very active, a strict, devout person in formal religion, but she vowed to rid Spain of unbelievers. And she established what we know in history as the Spanish Inquisition. Heretics, unbelievers, and Jews were rounded up They were interrogated and tortured.
Prince Henry the Navigator, so called because he was not a navigator. He was, however, a patron not only of sailors themselves, but of a special school at Sagres in which nautical knowledge was collected and new maps were made and all kinds of awesome stuff happened. And all that knowledge gave Portuguese sailors a huge competitive advantage when it came to exploration. Henry commissioned sailors to search for two things. First, a path to the Indian Ocean so they could get in on the lucrative spice trade. Now. In 1494, Pope Alexander VI settled a dispute between Portugal and Spain by dividing the world into two parts, the Spanish part and the Portuguese part. This whole thing, at least according to Pope Alexander VI, could be split between Spain and Portugal.